Harp on Sports, the Bar, podcast, media, audio, and radio network. What do we have in store for you on this edition of the program? A little college football playoff primer as we pump this sucker. It's amazing. We know 8 teams are in. We also know that none of them are in order at this point. In the past, going into conference championship weekend, 2 or 3 of the games really had an impact. This weekend, all of them do. Some games matter. Some games matter more, but they all matter, which is fascinating as we're going to go through this arc and what to expect coming up with the Mountain West Conference Championship game Friday night that could secure the first bid all the way through the weekend. So we're going to look at that. Also, the Rays stay, again, as the St. Pete City Council approving the bond measures that clear the way for the stadium to be built on their end. But you still need Pinellas County and the rest of this. And I look around, and there's one thing that's absent in all of this over the course of the last few years when it comes to the Rays, especially over the course of the last 60 days, and a little Strickland strength. The athletic director at the University of Florida, Scott Stricklin, has been a focal point for ire and criticism. He should be the SEC Athletic Director of the Year. That shows you how misguided the criticism of Scott Stricklin has been. So we'll dive into that as well. Again, Harp on Sports, the Bar, podcast, media, audio, radio network. Follow, share, like, subscribe at Harp on Sports Twitter, at Harp on Sports Instagram, Harp on Sports, the Bar, the Auditory Route, Buzzsprout, Spotify, Apple Podcast, Harp on Sports YouTube channel, Harp on Sports Facebook page, and of course, harponsports.com. All right, college football playoff. Every game matters. Some games matter more. Every game matters. Some games matter more. And there are certain ones that are win and you're in. The ACC, win and you're in. Big 12, win and you're in. Mountain West Conference Championship, win and you're in. Those 3 are win and you're ins. The SEC, it's a slating game. The SEC, you win if you are Georgia, probably going to be the 2 or 3 seed. If you lose in your Georgia, you're going to be down there around 9 or 10. If you're Texas, you win. You're in 2 seed, maybe 1 if Penn State pulls the upset. If you lose, you're probably going to be down there 6 or 7. The Oregon-Penn State Big Ten Championship is the most fascinating one, just because if Oregon wins, it's over. Penn State, will they fall from 5 to how far down will they fall? The one that's sitting pretty right now is Notre Dame, unless they're upsets. If there are no upsets, Notre Dame's going to be the 5 and they're going to host the 12. If there are upsets, Notre Dame could start to fall down. The scenario in which you start to envision this is if Georgia beats Texas, Georgia moves into the top 4. Does Texas fall behind Notre Dame? Do they? So Notre Dame's sitting there at 6. They could fall down to 7 depending on the scenario. So this weekend, it's so interesting because every single one of these, starting with a Mountain West Friday night that's now replaced the Pac-12 championship and the Friday night, spotlight feature. Then the navigation begins. And it's funny because you start to build, right? The Mountain West, probably the 12 seed. Well, Boise State wins, it's the 4 seed. That's another thing that's amazing about this, is that if Boise State beats UNLV, we know Boise State is going to be not only in the playoff, but they have a bye. If they lose, they're out of the sucker. So that's the gravity of some mean more. And I love the fact that then we start to build over the course of the afternoon. Then you have the Big 12 championship on Saturday, and okay, Iowa State, Arizona State win and they're in, but depending on some other upsets, should Clemson upset SMU, then the Arizona State, Iowa State winners, probably the 4 seed. If they don't upset, then they're probably the 11 or 12. It's a different feel going into the weekend because we haven't experienced this yet. And there's pearl clutching for Miami, and South Carolina is the hottest team. It just shows you that no matter what happens, people are going to be upset. But Miami didn't beat or play a ranked team all year. I'm not going to clutch my pearls for somebody that didn't play or beat a ranked team all year. Sorry. Florida State last year was an interesting discussion because the heart and soul of that team got hurt. They had fallen, way off the Vegas betting lines. And you looked around and you go, okay, well, Alabama just won the SEC with one loss, and here you have Florida State's undefeated, but they didn't play anybody, so one loss in a direction. It's funny, we make a case for a 3-loss team over a 2-loss team, a 2-loss team over a 1-loss team, but a 1-loss team over an undefeated team. Well, they're undefeated. It used to matter. It doesn't anymore. It doesn't. So Alabama with 3 as opposed to Miami with 2. It's just the way it is, man. Miami couldn't beat Syracuse on the road. Miami couldn't beat Georgia Tech. Yeah, they were gangbusters the first 5-6 weeks of the year, but if Miami would have won and got to the ACC championship game and lost to SMU, each with 1 loss, then you could have made a case for Miami. But the fact they didn't even get to the conference championship game, I know Alabama didn't either, I know. But Alabama's got at least 1 marquee win under their belt. He's got the Georgia win under the belt. Florida State's best win is what, Florida? Or Miami's best win is Florida? So, I look at the scenario of this, and, I always try to give you my predictions on this. It's what's interesting is I cannot recall, I went through and looked, a conference championship weekend where every single game, the spread, all 4, and then you count the Mountain West as the 5th, right? All 5 games, the spread's within 3.5. I've just never seen that. I went through there. There's a couple years that you'd have 1 or 2 point spread. You'd always has a 9 or a 10 point spread. This year, every spread of every championship games with 3.5 points. That's mind boggling. So what should you expect to happen? There'll be an upset or two. There always is. Always is. But which one's the most likely to happen? I guess you'd probably say Georgia, Texas, right? Because Georgia already beat them. The game is in Atlanta. That's the one that you'd say, okay, that's the most likely of upsets. Which one causes the most trouble? Well, the one that causes the most trouble is Clemson. Because if UNLV knocks off Boise State, then you just have some shuffling around. Clemson win over SMU. Now you have an SMU-Alabama debate. And SMU gets punished for going to their conference championship game and losing, which is something we brought up when they announced this 12-team playoff a couple of years ago. The discussion was going to be, how do you reward teams that aren't good enough to make their conference championship game and punish those that do? That's already if you're in. If you're not in, I get it. Like Iowa State's not in right now. So if they lose their conference championship game, they weren't going to make it anyway. UNLV's not in right now. Okay, if they lose their conference championship game, they weren't going to make it anyway. But teams that would be in right now, like Boise State would be in right now. SMU would be in right now. They lose, they're going to get punished and knocked out. Meanwhile, teams like Tennessee and Alabama and Notre Dame and Indiana are sitting around rewarded for their season being over, for being less successful. So there's where we sit with that. Now, I wanted to do a little exercise here. I wanted to look at what it would look like with a 4-team college playoff as opposed to, now, again, this is just slating, right? If Oregon wins, they're the 1 seed. If Texas wins, they're the 2 unless Oregon gets upset. If SMU wins, they're the 3. If Boise State wins, they're the 4. So if this thing goes chalk and all the favorites win, Texas is 1. Oregon's 1, Texas is 2, SMU 3, Boise State 4, Notre Dame 5, and then you start to have your discussions of who is 6. Penn State 6, Penn State 7. That would be the easy thing to do, right? You put Penn State at 6. Well, who's at 7 then? You move Ohio State up to 7. Georgia is sitting there. Georgia would drop. You assume that they would drop at least a spot, right? So you'd put, Ohio State at 7, Georgia at 8, Indiana at 9, Tennessee at 10, Alabama at 11, Arizona State at 12. Is that what you do? If all the favorites win? The 7, if Penn State loses, Georgia loses, Tennessee, Indiana, Notre Dame, that shuffle. I think Notre Dame will be at the top of that shuffle. But then what do you do with a Georgia and a Penn State that lost as opposed to an Indiana, Tennessee, and Alabama that didn't play? Trying to figure that out. Now, if you had a 4-team playoff, this would be our discussion if you had a 4-team playoff right now. The discussion would be this. Okay, Oregon's in. Your rankings would be what based on the college football playoff rankings? Number 1 is Oregon. Number 2 is Texas. Number 3 is Penn State. Number 4 is Notre Dame. So, under that scenario, Texas wins and they're in. Oregon wins and they're in. But if they lose, what do you do? What do you do with an SMU that knocks off Clemson? Because they're kind of sitting there looking, what about us? We just won the ACC. We're going to be out of this thing. Then you've got Georgia with 2 losses looking back there. Hey, wait about us. And if that goes all chalk and Oregon beats Penn State, it knocks Penn State out. Texas wins, so you'd have 1 Oregon, 2 Texas, 3 Notre Dame, and 4 question SMU sliding up into that spot. That would be your debate. Georgia wins and Penn State wins, then you've got different debates with the 14 playoff. Then at that point, Penn State moves to 1. They upset Oregon from 4. Texas is lost, so Penn State would be 1. Would Notre Dame then move from 3 to 2 or 4 to 2? Would Oregon be 3rd? Or would Georgia be 3rd, Oregon 4? See, with a 4 team and upsets, it turns into a little bit of a mess. So those would be your debates. The Big 12 game, the Mountain West and the Big 12 game would be throwaways. The ACC would matter if SMU would win and somehow, some way, Georgia upset Texas and Oregon beat Penn State. That's the discussion we would be having. And then you spin it around. And what if everything goes chalk? Teams like Indiana, Ohio State, Tennessee, Alabama, not even a thought. Not even a thought. So that's the difference between 12 and 4. Then you go back 20 years, actually 10 to 12 years. You go back to the good old BCS. What would your debate be? Well, you'd have 1 Oregon, 2 Texas, 3 Penn State, 4 Notre Dame. So in the old BCS era, your discussion would be, all right, Oregon wins, they're in. If Oregon loses, Penn State replaces them. The winner of Oregon-Penn State is in the BCS championship game. Then your debate would be, if Texas beats Georgia, Texas is in. If Georgia beats Texas, oh boy. Then your discussion turns into Notre Dame or SMU. Should SMU win? See how the BCS is more like, it's like a 3-layer thing? The Big 12 wouldn't mean anything. The Mountain West wouldn't mean anything. The ACC may mean something. The SEC would mean something. And the Big 10 would mean everything under the old BCS scenario. So if it goes chalk, Oregon wins, Texas wins, it'd be Oregon-Texas for the national championship. Texas get beat, your debate would be Notre Dame. I guess you put Georgia in there too as a discussion, but Notre Dame, who didn't play, Georgia, who just won the SEC, and SMU, who won the ACC with 1 loss. Those would be your debates. So there you go. Championship weekend. See how the 12 team just, the more you add, the more discussion you're going to have. So what's the dream scenario? The dream scenario, if you're the committee, the easiest thing is everybody that's favored wins. You're already going to have one hill to die on, and they've died on the hill of Alabama is more deserving than Miami. That's the hill they've died on. That they're going to die on this year. And people that want to complain about that are going to complain no matter what. There's no clear cut. If you put Miami ahead of Alabama, the inverse, Miami didn't play a top 25 team all year. It didn't beat one. We're going to put them in the playoff? 6-1, half dozen of another. All right. I want to pivot from that to this. I think this is so interesting. Scott Stricklin, the athletic director at Florida, he, covering the Gators and running the station, it gets you just insight into the vitriol and the angst amongst fans and boosters and people that want this man fired. Now, it's kind of one of these things where everybody's kind of hit the pause button. I want to run my mouth when things are going wrong. When things are going well, I'm going to shut up. I didn't say any of those things. But the thing that's interesting about Strickland is this. They hand out awards at the end of the year. And, you look back at the 2024 calendar year. The best athletic director in the SEC in terms of success on the field, Scott Stricklin. Go back. Go back and look. The men's, you bookend it with the basketball seasons. Basketball team goes on a great run, goes to the SEC championship game, probably wins the SEC title basketball tournament if Henglotten doesn't bust up his leg in the finals against Auburn. So they go to the SEC finals, go on a great run, make the NCAA tournament. Softball goes to the College World Series with the freshmen, almost wins the sucker, loses in walk-off fashion to Oklahoma, who just tears through Texas. Baseball struggles in the regular season, goes on a tear in the postseason. Final three softball, final three baseball. Track and field wins a championship. Of course, tennis competes for a championship. You look at golf, good once again. Then you roll through the summer of the other Olympic sports, swimming and diving dominate as they always do. You roll into the other sports then as the fall hits. Soccer is immeasurably, they struggle at the end, but they're better. Volleyball makes the NCAA tournament again. Football goes on a tear at the end of the end. And basketball's top 10 team. Well, he didn't hire a lot of those coaches. So if I get this correct, Scott Stricklin only gets credit for the coaches he hires. That's it, right? What about the coaches he didn't fire? A lot of people wanted Kevin O'Sullivan fired, the baseball coach. He chose not to. After he chose not to, back-to-back College World Series runs, one trip to the championship game, one trip to the Final Three. Do you get credit for not listening to the mob in that case? The mob wanted Billy Napier fired after 3 games. He didn't listen to him. Does he get credit for that? Or no? You look at the athletic programs. It's the athletic director's responsibility, the athletic programs, maintaining them, running them across the board. Coaches hiring assistants, assistants come and go. The athletic director get credit for that? Because we sit here and say, well, the athletic director, only the head coach. The athletic director doesn't get credit for the assistant coaches. Sully's had guys come and go. He's hired assistants. Todd Golden's had guys come and go. He's hired assistants. Now get credit for that? No. He's the most successful coach in the SEC. Because someone would point to Oklahoma and someone would point to Texas. They haven't been in the SEC all 2024. Just 4 months, 3 months. The most successful athletic director in this conference for the last year has been Scott Stricklin. It's the truth. Truth has no temperature. Neither hot nor cold. It's just the truth. So, something to think about as we harump. Story's been written for Scott Stricklin in 2024. Success. And that's not me telling you, that's Vegas telling you. The 2 most successful teams in the SEC, compared to what Vegas thought at the beginning of the year, were they Vanderbilt? Florida. Florida picked to win 4.5 games, they've won 7. Vanderbilt picked to win 3.5, they won 6. 2.5 above Vegas average. And gang, that's a place that has billion-dollar cathedrals on you being wrong. I'm going to wrap with this. The Rays are going to stay again. I look at the last 24 hours in baseball. The A's get their new stadium deal approved, $1.75 billion. That's finally done. They dropped $60 million on a guy that's had a bounce back here in Severino. And the A's all of a sudden, we got a new ballpark. Here's a new deal. Here's a shiny new toy that probably will never play in that ballpark. 1, because they're playing in Sacramento, at least for the next couple of years. 2, it's a 3-year deal. 3, you think if this guy's like 10-6 at the trading deadline, the A's aren't going to peel him off for 2 or 3 prospects in their rebuilding process? It's actually kind of smart when you think about it. You give a guy a bunch of money, you bring him in, you sign him to a 3-year deal, which is not a massive deal. He goes out and he has a good year. He's going to be a monster trade bargaining chip at the deadline. It's not that bad of a deal. Going out and signing bullpen arms that a lot of people overpay for, the A's, it's kind of a smart idea what they did here. If they intend to move him. If they don't intend to move him, I get it. You want somebody, but this is not the type of guy it's the type of guy that helps you rebuild, not a guy that helps you win. If that makes any sense. So that over here with Oakland, then you look at Tampa. Oakland. That with the Raiders. That with the A's, the Sacramento A's that were the Oakland A's that are now going to be the Las Vegas A's. The A's Trinity. I take a step back and I look at the stadium deal. St. Pete City Council goes, yes, we've done our end of the deal. Pinellas County meets here in a week and a half. What the debate is there is tourist taxes. So what are tourist taxes? Hotel taxes, parking taxes, things of that nature that people come into town, visit Tampa, you hit them up. Indianapolis did something very similar when they built Lucas Oil, in which in Conseco is what at the time it was Conseco. Now it's what it was Banker's Life. I can't remember. It's where the Pacers play. So you look at what happened in Indy, where they basically used hotel taxes in Marion County and said, okay, everybody that stays here, we're not going to nail our own citizens with property taxes and things of that nature. We're going to nail you with the tourist tax. And we're going to jack up the rate 2% in hotel rooms. And over the course of 30 years, that'll make us, $3, $4, $500 million. That'll help pay down this new state. That's what we're going to do. So you're passing it off to tourists. It'd be like if Disney charged an extra 2% tax rate on hotels to rebuild things. Well, then they're using tourists to pay for things and not the people. You get the idea. Here's the thing: $55.5 million to clean up the trop. So that's money that's just basically you're patching a car you're going to sell. What you're doing is you're fixing a leak in a house, or you're fixing a car that you're going to total in a year. But you need to keep that car running for another year. That's what they're doing here. We're going to rebuild. Okay. $55 million to this. Major League Baseball's kind of stayed out of this. But if Major League Baseball really, really gave a damn and wanted to make baseball work, wouldn't Major League Baseball pony up the $55 million to patch up the trop to get a new stadium deal done? And maybe they will. Maybe they will. And this is where the city of, St. Pete, and this is where you got Tampa and St. Pete. If you're the Rays, wouldn't you go to Major League Baseball and say, look, if we get this through, would you help us out here in the interim, man, and just toss us a bone here financially to help us repair the trop? We can streamline this, get it built or get it redone. That way we can start construction on the new stadium. You're gonna come on, help us out here. This was an act of God. This wasn't us just being lazy. The hurricane and ripping this thing apart, and you can talk about insurance and what it was insured for and all those things. But if Major League Baseball really, 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 really wanted baseball to stay in Tampa, they'd help get this done. This is how, it's funny because football operates a little bit differently, right? Roger Goodell, big push to get something done in LA. Gets the stadium, boom, here you go, 1-2 punch, boom. Roger Goodell really helping in Minneapolis when the Vikings were trying to get their deal done. Roger Goodell, danced in Jacksonville a little bit, but never really forced the issue. He's really all in right now in D.C., trying to get a new stadium, trying to meet with legislators, trying to get a new deal done in D.C., really lobbying. He wants football to stay in D.C., and I get it. Of course you would. There's certain markets, okay, if football leaves here, we're not going to really, Oakland with the Raiders, Roger Goodell really wasn't, But baseball, the big test for baseball will be when the White Sox start to decide what they want to do. Do they really want a second team? It's going to look around. I think at that point you'll see Robert Manfred or somebody in baseball really, really want to be a part of helping. We got to keep the White Sox in Chicago because it's more profitable right now for a Major League Baseball team not to be in Tampa. It's more profitable for them to be somewhere else. It really is. And if you're Major League Baseball, you don't want to go in and have the image of you're trying to shift a team out of a city. Oh no, you're going to play politics with this one. You're going to sit back and let the political landscape take care of this one. I look at it from the Rays perspective in the organization where talking about ownership selling, and that would probably be the best thing, ownership selling and staying. But right now, if you're Robert Manfred, you look around and go, wait a second here. We're going to end up getting this Vegas deal done for the Raiders, I keep saying the Raiders, the A's. And in 5 years, when that stadium's built and it's innovative and it's going to be a crown jewel, and nobody's going to remember the 2 awful years in Oakland. The last 2 final awful years in Oakland and the terrible years in Sacramento. It's kind of like the Titans going to get this new, $2 billion stadium. I remember it, but nobody, sits back and remembers the year that they played at the Liberty Bowl and how awful that was. You just don't. You move on. Oh yeah, that was kind of rough. Once you get through the hard times, So I look at this and baseball with Tampa. Oh, they can finally get a deal done, man. When I see the shovels and the payloaders, and once that happens, this is a done deal now. No, it's not. Vegas, they've approved a deal. Okay, Tropicana's torn down. Once I see the cranes and the steel and the rebar and I'm in. Once I see that, I'm good. All the bonds have been approved. Okay, I've heard this Ray Stadium deal's passed like 6 times now. Shovel, dirt, I'm in. But the thing about this is the one thing that's painfully obvious through all of this the last 2 months. Major League Baseball doesn't want the Rays to stay in Tampa. If they would, they'd help. Harp on Sports, the Bar podcast, audio, radio network. Follow, share, like, subscribe at Harp on Sports Twitter, at Harp on Sports Instagram, Harp on Sports Auditory Route, Buzzsprout, Spotify, Apple Podcast, Harp on Sports YouTube channel, Harp on Sports Facebook page, and of course, harponsports.com. Western Michigan heading to Montgomery for what was formerly the Camellia Bowl. Salute to Veterans Bowl now. College football playoff. As they take on South Alabama, you may have a 2026 championship game preview to start the bowl season this year. Remember, stay clean, stay focused, stay strong. Frankenstein, have fun with your friends.